Katie, and I'm sharing my testimony of how I went from being trafficked into prostitution and stripping and childhood sexual abuse, domestic abuse, ritual abuse, to having complete divine intervention from God, and my journey through that. My childhood was extremely volatile as I grew up. There was so much violence in our home. I grew up with a single mother. My mum and dad divorced when I was very little, and there was a lot of poverty. You know, my mum was struggling to support 3 children on her own, and it was at this time that a predator posing as a helper wormed his way into our family life at my mum's most vulnerable moment. She met a man who would offer her the whole world, you know, when she was really struggling. And this man made her perhaps feel built up. You know, he helped her financially. He was in a much better position financially than she was. He was there for all of her children. He played a role of a secondary father to us children. He inserted himself in every element of our family life very quickly, and they very, very quickly got married. From the age of 7, this man who she married subjected me to the worst possible, the worst imaginable kind of abuse. He subjected me to sexual abuse as a child. He spent a long time grooming me as well as my mother in order for that to happen. He then later escalated this, you know, which did turn into violence against me as well if I ever tried to fight back. And there were also other perpetrators involved in this, in more of a ritual way of this manifesting. There were a lot of connections growing up with Freemasonry in my family, and as a result of that, that was also another open door, you know, to these horrific experiences that I had growing up as a child. I always was quite focused on the Lord's Prayer as a child. This was the only prayer I knew. I didn't know about God, I didn't know about the Bible, but the Lord's Prayer had always been something that my dad had tried to get me to memorize each night before bed. It was really important that I would do that. You know, the times that I did speak with my dad and the times that my dad was there, he tried to instill this prayer with me. So this prayer carried its way through my childhood. And as well as that, another thing that I did to cope with what was going on and what was being done to me, I painted my ceiling blue, and I painted clouds upon my ceiling to create a skyscape. And for the many, many times that I was either lay in bed on my own, worrying and anxious about how I would survive, you know, or when the abuse itself was actually happening and all I could do was look up at the ceiling, I had this skyscape, you know, this beautiful skyscape to disappear into and to fly off into. So I used to just imagine that I was with God, really, and that I was just flying in the sky. And I came out of my body as well at that time, and I would look down on my body whilst this was happening to me. I completely separated off. So I learned from very early how to dissociate from myself and my body as a way of surviving. And what an amazing thing, our brain is, to be able to do that and to be able to cope and stay alive through the most horrific abuse. Later on, as I got slightly older, by sort of age 14, I started to escape out of the house. I would do anything to get out of the house. I would literally just jump out of windows. I'd jump out of the first floor window in order to get away at night so that I could avoid what was inevitably going to happen. And I used to just go out for hours and hours on end. I used to just walk and walk and walk. Sometimes I would run. I really enjoyed running because it made me feel like I had some control over my own body, that I had some autonomy over my own body, and it released a lot of that pent-up energy, anger and fear, that I had within me. So I used to run, and I grew up in quite a middle-class neighbourhood, so I felt really safe. Paradoxically, I felt very safe being outside in complete darkness in the street, much more safe than I did at home. However, after some time of me doing this, there was a gang of older men, perhaps in their mid-20s, who had noticed me. They were driving around in their car and they'd noticed me, and they had stopped me quite a number of times to try and convince me to get in their car to go for a drive. I didn't do it the first few times, but I think by perhaps the third or fourth time that I said, okay, I'll get in the car with you and we'll go for a drive. And that was when what was happening to me really escalated into a feeling of complete lack of control over everything external to me. This gang are what's known now as a grooming gang. So I was subjected to further sexual abuse and exploitation through multiple perpetrators for a period of time. I still had this fighting spirit in me, though. At that time, I still really wanted to get out from my circumstances and away from my circumstances. I just didn't accept that there wasn't a way out. I was still pushing all the time. I was still pushing to try and get out of that situation. And I actually approached the local housing office, and I asked them, I said, can you find me somewhere to go? Because where I am at the moment, there's violence happening in my home. I disclosed the domestic abuse, but unfortunately they said, we can't help you because you're not old enough to do a housing application. You have to be 17 before we'll consider that. And so when they told me that, all of my hope that I'd been putting on that escape route was shattered. Every piece of hope had just disintegrated in that moment, and I didn't know what else to do. I felt completely broken by this. This was the first time that I disclosed anything verbally to anyone, and I felt like the door was being slammed in my face, that I'd been shut out of any safety or any help. So I ended up overdosing quite soon after that, because I felt that if I was to do that, I'd be given an opportunity perhaps to disclose what was going on, and then maybe I'd be taken to safety. I was very cautious of trusting people in authority or adults, because I'd been already hurt so many times that I was very cautious. So my way around that was to overdose and then be perhaps given the space to be heard. Unfortunately, it didn't work out like that. I was taken to hospital, and the doctor quite coldly, didn't look at me, but just felt like he was looking through me, I wasn't seen as a person, I was just seen as something to sign off, so he just kept on repeating himself and saying, did you intend to kill yourself or not? Did you intend to do this or not? And I wouldn't answer the question, and then eventually he got quite frustrated and he said, well, was this a cry for help or did you intend to die? And I said, well, it was a cry for help, and I thought, amazing, now he can see that I need help. Now he's recognizing that I need help, so I felt very hopeful in that moment. And I said, yes, it was a cry for help. I need help. Help me, help me. And I was given opportunity to speak to some therapists very, very briefly within the hospital setting. And I explained to them a little bit of what was going on at home. I didn't explain everything because I didn't yet trust them. But I explained what I'd already disclosed with the violence, and I explained that my mother's partner was violent towards her and violent towards me, and that he hurt me. I think I specifically actually used the words, he hurts me. So I didn't go into all of everything else, what was going on, but I just scraped the surface just to see what would happen. And unfortunately, despite that huge effort on my part to put my last remaining bit of trust in something external that might help me, I was sent home again, and there was no further intervention. No social worker was called to the family. There was no more hope. After that hospital visit, I actually had to go home and face, my mother's partner and my main perpetrator. I had to go home and face him. I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. I thought he was going to kill me, because he'd found out that I'd disclosed some of what was said. And he assaulted my mum quite horrifically that day as punishment for what I had did. He turned around and looked at me and said, this is all your fault. I took my younger brother at the time out of the house because I was worried for his safety, and I took him for a walk, and I went out and I just broke down crying. 'Cause there was no more hope. There was nothing more to look forward to. That was it. I felt that although I was still physically here, I had died. After that hospital visit, I had felt a death within me, and I just gave up. I will explain more of my journey in the next part. I will explain with you how I came to be trafficked, and all of what that entailed within the industry, and then eventually how God pulled me out of all of that, literally just lifted me up, out of all of the wreckage and said, I want you. I want you, you're mine. You're never going back to any of that, so click on part 2 for the rest of the story.